You're already dead. You just don't know it yet. Imagine. Your toes have turned black. Not from cold, but from rot. Your skin is cracked like old clay, and beneath it, wet, foul-smelling pulp. This isn't a wound. This is trench foot. A fungus eating you from the inside out while you stand in your own urine and muddy rainwater. The water in your boots doesn't drain. It becomes your second habitat, like an aquarium for a corpse. Now, take a breath. The air is yellow-green, heavy. It feels like inhaling chlorine from a bucket. It's April 1915. Ypres. For the first time in history, war stopped breathing. A gas attack isn't an explosion, not fire. It's a silent killer that burns your lungs from within. You cough, spit mucus, fall to your knees and die, suffocating in your own foam. But let's say you're lucky. You're not in that trench, not on that day. You're alive, clean, intact. And yet, you're already infected. The ground beneath you is a soup of feces, blood, and pus. Every step is a risk of sepsis. Every scratch is a ticket to the morgue. Dysentery turns your intestines inside out. Typhus burns your brain. And lice, those tiny black demons, carry typhus faster than a homing pigeon. Do you think you're fighting the Germans? No. You're fighting the mold in your socks, the bacteria in your drinking water, the fungus that grows faster than your hope for survival. And here's the paradox. Most soldiers who left the front didn't have bullet wounds. They were carried off on stretchers with black skin, rotting feet, lungs turned to wet cotton. The command called it moral exhaustion. In reality, it was a biological collapse. Imagine your boots are a coffin, and the trench is a grave where you're still breathing. Would you survive? Probably not, because in 1914 the chance of dying from dirt was higher than from a bullet. And that's not a metaphor. It's medical statistics. Look at this. 20 million went through the trenches. 10 million returned with bodies destroyed, not by war, but by the conditions in which war held them. You're already dead. You just haven't fallen yet. April 1915. Ypres. Morning. The German trenches are quieter than a tomb. No shots, no screams. Only raven wings over the swamp. The French joke, maybe they surrendered? And then, a yellow-green fog. It doesn't rise. It creeps like a snake along the ground, clings to the damp earth, breathes, lives. Seen soldiers laugh, pointing at the fog. Look, it's like theater. A minute later, a gasp. One clutches his throat. His eyes bulge from the pressure. Tears. Not water, but acid. He rips his shirt, scratches his chest to the bone, and falls. The second runs, straight into his trench. Behind him, a third, a fourth. They carry death in their hands, in their lungs, in their saliva. Would you survive? Imagine. The air isn't our air. It burns, as if you're inhaling boiling water with chlorine. Your lungs don't breathe. They weep, producing fluid. 2 liters in 3 hours. You're not suffocating. You're drowning. Standing up, fully conscious. Scene. A soldier on his knees, mouth open, bloodied foam from his nose. Medics wrote, died with open eyes and clenched fists. This wasn't death. It was torture, disguised as war. And here's the irony. The protection was worse than nothing. The British were given gauze masks soaked in soda. Sounds like a solution? In reality, it was a trap. After 15 minutes, the fabric became saturated with chlorine. It stopped working. But the soldier thought, I'm safe. He stayed put, breathed deeper. Death came not to those who fled, but to those who trusted a piece of paper on their face. Scene. A mask soaked in yellow slime. This wasn't protection. It was a guaranteed one-way ticket to hell. Now, imagine you survived. You coughed up your lungs, washed your eyes. You're trembling, But breathing. Congratulations. You've passed level 1. But in the trenches, level 2 awaits. It doesn't smell of chlorine. It smells of dampness, rot, sweat. It lives in your boots. And it starts simply, wet feet. After 2 days, itching. After 5, your skin cracks like dried-out clay. After a week, black flesh, rot without air. Pain so severe that soldiers themselves asked for their legs to be amputated. Are you familiar with that feeling, when your socks are wet all day? Multiply that by 40 degrees below freezing, by a week without changing, by a fungus that grows faster than your will to live. And then, you didn't die from gas. You didn't fall under artillery fire. You lie in a hospital, without feet. And at the front, not even a shot was fired. He survived the gas at Ypres. He survived artillery fire where the earth shook like a dying animal. But 2 months later, he was carried from the front, without legs. Not because of a bullet, not because of shrapnel, because of socks. Imagine, your feet are wet. Not like after a shower, but as if you've stood in a puddle of rotten water for a week. The skin between your toes turns white, then it cracks. Not like a callus, like a chalky crust under your nail. Then comes the pain, sharp, pulsating, as if red-hot needles are being stuck into your foot. You can't stand. You can't walk. Even lying down hurts. Doctors remove the boot and turn away. Black flesh, swollen, shiny with pus. It smells sweet like rotten meat in a bag under the sun, without a single wound. Only moisture, dirt, cold. He begged, cut them off. Not to live, to stop feeling. Would you survive? Are you familiar with that feeling when your socks are wet all day? Multiply that by 7 days, by 40 degrees below freezing, by a fungus that grows faster than your thoughts. Here's the paradox. British reports clearly show that soldiers who changed their socks every 2 days got sick 3 times less often. The problem wasn't the war. It was logistics. Command skimped on cotton, as if socks were a luxury, not armor. Ammunition, yes. Rifles, yes. But dry socks? Endure it. But rot doesn't wait. In the trench, humidity is 95%, an ideal incubator for bacteria that eat flesh without air. Skin peels away. Toes stick together in a rotting mass. The foot turns into a sponge, soaked in death. And that's where the worst begins. The pain becomes so unbearable that amputation isn't a sentence. It's relief. Soldiers themselves submitted reports. Cut it off. Not for salvation, for silence. Because in that silence, the end of pain. Scene. A trembling hand over a knife. Next to it, a black foot. This isn't a disease. It's torture in real time. And it claimed more legs than all mines and shells combined. But even if your feet are intact, you're still trapped, because trenches aren't ditches. They're giant petri dishes, where feces, blood, and pus mix into one soup, where one sick person is an epidemic, where drinking water is scooped from a puddle, into which an entire regiment drains. Do you think you're fighting the enemy? No. You're fighting the microbe that lives in your boot, and it's already winning. February 12, 1915. A field medic writes in a tattered notebook, received 32 cases of gangrene, not a single bullet, not a single shard, only black flesh, eyes, like a cornered animal. He asks command to withdraw the battalion. Dysentery affects 60% of the personnel. The answer, do not change positions, strategic necessity. Would you survive? Imagine you eat, sleep, and defecate in 1 square meter. For months. The corpses of your neighbors rot 2 steps away, decomposing in the same moisture as your socks. Drinking water. From a puddle where a lieutenant died yesterday. Soil analyses from those places still show E. coli in concentrations that would make today's lab technician run away in tears. And back then, no antibiotics, No sterile bandages. Only soap, if you were lucky. But soap isn't a commodity. It's currency. At Christmas 1914, in that very truce when enemies sang the same hymn, they didn't exchange bullets. They gave each other socks, dry underwear, a piece of soap. One Briton wrote home, "The best gift from a German is a pair of clean socks. I'd give my greatcoat for them." This isn't mercy. It's a survival code. In a world where dirt kills faster than bullets, hygiene is your last shield. Scene. Dirty hands extend a bundle. Inside. White socks. Command saw the front as a map. Points, lines, resources. But your body isn't a point. It's a bioreactor that explodes at the first crack in your skin. One cut. One night in wet pants. And bacteria start eating you from the inside. Sepsis. In 2 days. Death. Without drama. Without a last breath. You just stopped breathing in the morning. Are you familiar with that feeling, when a puddle smells of rot after the rain? Multiply that by 100 bodies, by 3 months without changing clothes, by lice crawling under your armpits like black beads. This isn't a trench. It's a petri dish where man is the nutrient medium, and the system knew it, but chose to remain silent. Because admitting that soldiers were dying from dirt meant admitting that the war was lost not on the battlefield, but in logistics, in bureaucracy, in the order, hold positions. Look at this. You didn't die under fire. You didn't suffocate in gas. You didn't drown in dysentery. You just woke up with a black foot and realized you lost the battle without even noticing when it began. Now, imagine your body is intact, but your mind is already cracking. Because ahead is not silence. Ahead is thunder. 10 hours a day, 12 nights in a row. Artillery doesn't wound the skin. It erases reality. 12 hours. Non-stop. No silence. Only roaring. Explosions. The earth trembling beneath you, like a living creature ready to swallow you whole. You sit, pressed against the trench wall, covering your ears. But the sound doesn't stop. It creeps inside your skull, vibrates in your teeth, in your eyeballs, in your bones. You don't sleep, you don't eat. You just wait. By the end of the shelling, your hands tremble so much that your mug slips. Your fingers don't obey. Your voice, a hoarse whisper, as if someone ripped out your vocal cords and left only breath. You look at your comrade, but you don't recognize him. His eyes, empty, like a dead man who is still breathing. In your head, only noise, constant, all-consuming. And even when the shooting stops, it remains, because now it's inside. Part of your nervous system, rebuilt for eternal terror. Would you survive? Imagine. Your brain, like a phone with a siren blaring at full volume. 24 hours a day. 7 days a week, without an off button. Are you familiar with that feeling when your ears ring after a concert? Multiply that by 1,000, by concrete vibration, by the fear that the next shell is yours. Scene. A soldier sits staring at a wall, fingers digging into the earth, mouth slightly open, but no sound comes out. This condition would later be called shell shock. One of the first forms of post-traumatic stress that medicine even noticed. But in 1915, Command wrote in reports, malingerer, coward, moral decay. A soldier with trembling hands and wet pants, not sick. He's a traitor. He wasn't taken to the hospital. He was led to the wall, or to a disciplinary battalion, where the chance of dying is 90%. Only in 1917, when psychiatrists saw every 10th soldier couldn't speak, sleep, recognize his mother's face. Only then did they admit. The psyche breaks, like a bone, like a foot in a wet boot. Man is not designed to live in a state of anxiety 24 hours a day. And the trenches were a laboratory where they tested. How many times can you hit the brain with sound before it stops working? 7 to 10% of all soldiers on the Western Front went mad, That's from 1,400,000 to 2 million men. They returned home, intact, without scratches. But inside, emptiness. Many couldn't work, couldn't look at their children, couldn't stand the loud sound of a kettle. Some hanged themselves in the barn. A year later, 10 years later, they weren't buried with honors. They were shamed. Because war cannot see wounds that don't bleed. But they were there. And there were more of them than it seems. Official statistics. A lie. Command hid the numbers, so as not to admit the system kills not only bodies, but minds. Look at this. You didn't die from gas. You didn't rot from moisture. You didn't drown in dysentery. You just stopped being yourself, because your brain could no longer bear the noise. Now, imagine all of this happening simultaneously. Gas, rot, dirt, thunder, and you, in the midst of this hell, without dry socks, without soap, without sleep, without silence. Would you survive? Probably not. Because in 1914 the chance of going insane was higher than returning home intact. And that's not drama. It's medical statistics. You thought the trench was protection? No, it's a trap. Imagine a hospital in the rear, a barracks with cracked windows. The floor, sawdust soaked in pus and blood. On the cots, not those mutilated by bullets, but those whose bodies are being eaten from the inside by dysentery. Legs, black up to the knees. Skin, pulp, eyes, emptiness. The nurse doesn't look him in the face. She knows he has no wounds, only rot without air, only a fever of 40, only a moan that doesn't subside for 3 days. Now, a number. 40% of hospitalizations on the Western Front. Not from bullets, not from shrapnel, from dirt, from water, from lice, from socks that hadn't been changed for 2 weeks. Here's a paradox for you. More soldiers succumbed to mold in their boots than died at Verdun. Yes, that's right. In that very meat grinder, where 300,000 were killed in 5 months, diseases claimed more. Quietly, without sirens, without glory. You just didn't get up in the morning. Command counted bullets. It didn't count bacteria. A bullet. A heroic death. Dysentery. Weakness. Gangrene. Misfortune. But in reality, a systemic failure. The army supplied rifles but not soap. Ammunition but not dry socks. And this isn't a mistake, it's a choice. Would you survive? Imagine, your trench is 2 meters deep, zigzagging like an intestine. Water doesn't drain. Humidity, 95%. Perfect for fungus that turns a foot into a sponge of death in a week. Rats run over corpses in the neighboring dugout. Their fleas carry plague. And your gas mask, gauze with soda, useless after 15 minutes. The trench doesn't save. It concentrates threats. It turns you into a nutrient medium. And the cruelest part? You cling to this hole yourself. Because outside, bullets. And inside, slow decomposition. But decomposition doesn't wait. It works, day after day, hour after hour, until your body gives up. Laboratory analyses of soil from preserved trenches are still shocking. Pathogens are 300 times more abundant than in ordinary earth. This isn't a trench. It's a petri dish the size of a continent. So, if you think you would have survived, think again. You wouldn't have died from the enemy. You would have died from a system that considered your skin expendable. And that's not a tragedy. It's a calculation. The rain has been pouring for 3 days. You stand on a duckboard, rotten, slippery, covered in slime. You slip. Water sloshes into your boots. They've been wet since last week. No sock change for 11 days. You grab sandbags. They disintegrate into mud. From above, they shout, "Don't move! Artillery at any moment!" You freeze. An hour. 2. Night. The water is 2 degrees Celsius. Your fingers turn white, then blue. Your skin cracks. Beneath it, pulsation. A smell. Sweet, nauseating. The first signs of rot without air. You're not wounded. You're not even in combat. But you're already dead. British medics knew. At humidity above 80%, fungus penetrates flesh in 72 hours. And the humidity in the trench is 95. Trenches were dug in zigzags so that shrapnel wouldn't cut through a line of bodies. But these turns caught water like funnels. No drainage was made. Instructions stated, rely on the soil's absorbency. The clay of the Western Front didn't absorb. It sealed. Water stood for months. The pH, ideal for bacteria that eat flesh in the dark. Rats proliferated. 1 pair. 200 offspring in a year. Toilet buckets were emptied once a week. If lucky, soldiers endured until their intestines burst. All of this, not chaos. It's a design. The trench is not a shelter. It's a bioreactor of death. And that's where the most terrifying part begins. Command knew. Generals' diaries are full of entries about epidemic risk. But shifting positions means losing strategy. So you were left to rot, to go mad, to lose your legs, for 3 meters of mud that would be recaptured tomorrow. Hold the position at all costs. That's not an order. It's a sentence. And the most terrible weapon of war didn't fire. It breathed in your boots. Would you survive? Imagine. Your smartphone fell into a puddle. After an hour, corrosion. After a day, inoperable. Now imagine your body in the same puddle. 3 months. Without changing clothes, without soap, without sleep. Laboratory analyses of soil from the trenches still show bacteria are 300 times more abundant than in ordinary earth. This isn't a failure. It's a calculation. And in it, you're not a soldier. You're a nutrient medium. You wouldn't have survived. And here's why. Gas, moisture, dirt, thunder. Each separately killed. Together, they worked like a conveyor belt. Chemicals burned out lungs in 15 minutes. Moisture in boots initiated anaerobic rot. Skin peeled like wet linoleum. A scratch from a rusty nail turned into sepsis. Bacteria from feces and corpse fluid invaded the blood. And penicillin hadn't been invented yet. Artillery hit not the body, but the brain. 12 hours of roaring, and you stopped speaking, recognizing comrades, controlling your bladder. This wasn't a fall in battle. It was a system failure. And the system was set up for you to rot quietly, without medals, without a name, just a number on a list of non-combat casualties. Remember that guy from the beginning? He survived Ypres, coughed out the chlorine, made it to the trench. A month later, his legs turned black, not from cold, but from mold that grew in his wet socks. 9 days without changing. Doctors amputated his feet without anesthesia, but the rot crept higher. Anaerobic bacteria in the trench soil multiplied faster than surgeons could cut. He died in a hospital, soiled, clutching a letter from his mother. A clean sheet of paper, a luxury for which he would have given his greatcoat. He's not on the Thiepval Memorial. He's nowhere. Just one of 8 million who died not from a bullet, but because command saved money on cotton. We think war is a feat, but in 1916, death didn't come from the front. It seeped from the earth, from boots, from one's own skin. You didn't die for your homeland. You rotted for the order, hold positions. For 3 meters of mud that would be retaken a week later. Irony? At Christmas 1915, soldiers exchanged not bullets with the enemy, but socks and soap. Because they understood, cleanliness saves more often than bravery. Now, it's your turn. Gas or foot? Which is scarier? Drowning in your own foam, suffocating in a yellow-green fog, or watching your toes turn into a black sponge, emitting a sweet, cadaverous odor? Which is more agonizing? 15 minutes of hell in chlorine, or a week when you can't even lie down because the pain in your feet tears your consciousness to shreds? Imagine, you're in the trench. Your socks have been wet since Monday. The water in your boots is icy. Artillery has been thundering for 12 hours. Your ears are ringing. There's a lump in your throat. And then, fog. Yellow-green, creeping along the ground. Would you survive a week? Honestly. Without heroism. Just survive. Scene. A hand drops a letter into a puddle of pus. No medals. Just a number.